Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips, and if you're noticing that something is very different about today's podcast, yes, I am not wearing a vest. So that's
you got a vest on under there.
Somewhere. No, we are, of course, at Texas Public Policy Foundation's annual Texas Policy Summit. So we're coming to you, I guess not live, but we are coming to you from the AT&T Hotel and Conference Center here in Austin. Today's Friday, and we're on day 3, so the last day of our big policy conference. And I am, of course, with my indubitable co-host, Derek Cohen, who's with us. So we're having a good policy conference. Thoughts? Comments on how things are going?
This is the largest one we've ever done. The fact that we had to basically move 2 of the panel rooms upstairs so that the ballroom could accommodate, and the fact that we're seeing the standing room only for, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the Speaker of the House. I think that you can't deny just how great it is to get the conversation started here at TPPF. And that being said, it's what has been said is really kind of already animating what we're seeing in the legislature.
That's right. We're about 45 days into the session. We're sort of in that emergency session, that first 60 days when you can't do anything except what's on the governor's call. So a lot of action that's going around. Let's get to, some of the news that was made here at the conference. Let's start in with the governor's speech on Wednesday.
Yeah.
I got some people asking, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but all of the material that we've done here at TPS will be online within 24 hours. So, if you missed the governor's speech, if you missed the speaker's speech or the lieutenant governor or Chip Roy this morning, all of that will be online. And so we can link to all that if you missed it. But let's go back to the governor's speech. Some people, during the speech were texting me and saying, this guy's really getting into the weeds. Normally he comes out, he's very inspirational and he gives a rah-rah speech, but he's really getting into the weeds on school choice, on specifically school choice. But I think it was needed. I think there's been a lot of misinformation that's been being pushed by the left and others. And frankly, there are some legitimate concerns about the bill specifically. Some people are looking at the bill and saying, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for me as a homeschooler? What does that mean for me as a conservative? Should I be supporting, is this some kind of new government entitlement?
Right.
So there's some real concerns there, and he addressed a lot of that in his speech.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because I watched the online left try to parse that out, and they're like, oh, well, he's explaining so he's losing, and it's like, no, he's explaining because he already won. And because, the policy, the binary yes-no decision has been made.
Right.
Anyone who can count to 76 realizes that that's the case. But what he was doing is, to your point, he was dispelling a lot of the myth that we've seen that are giving people some trepidation about this. You mentioned the homeschooler thing. Another thing was, teacher pay. Now, obviously, school choice and teacher pay are 2 distinct separate issues. And teacher pay, no matter what any one tells you otherwise, is determined by the local district. But he's going to put some money available for that too. Then we heard, and I don't want to segue prematurely, but we heard on Thursday morning from the speaker about how that's going to happen, and he had a fulsome plan on that. So Governor Abbott simply parsing out the idea and how it's going to work where the rubber hits the road really isn't anything new, but it might not be something that has been consumed in popular culture. Obviously, look, we all know the specifics and the mechanics of how a thorough universal school choice bill is going to work. But that doesn't mean everybody here is. Now, if they're here, they're probably, I think I could say, probably school choice curious, if not school choice sympathetic, right? But if they're here, they might have other issues that are, top of mind. We have right now that's going on, Chuck's China panel. I know a lot of people that are really interested in that. So they might not have the ability or just the hours in the day to dig into, well, how are we going to account for, silver pennies versus golden pennies and stuff like that, or, how are you going to do co-curriculars and, who is actually eligible as a recipient for this? That's all so in the weeds. But being able to parse through that and just punch holes and kind of what's left of the opposition, I think actually does a lot for communicating the actual policy specifics to the general public.
So you mentioned it. We'll go right into it. The Speaker of the House, Dustin Burrows, was here on Thursday morning, and the big headline, the second half of his speech was entirely dedicated to school choice. He went through a number of different initiatives, so I think it's important for him to lay out his agenda, and he did a really good job at that. But then the second half of his speech was dedicated to announcing announcing that they had filed HB3, which is the companion to SB2.
While he was on stage.
While he was on stage, as well as HB2, which is another education-related bill. It's an education financing bill, which will, create new monies for teachers and for public education. And he called it the Texas two-step.
Yeah.
That we needed to fund education, but while at the same time giving parents more options. There are some differences in the bills. I think the way we would describe it is that HB3 really builds on the success of SB2, but a lot of people might be looking at it and saying, it's actually a stronger bill, which is great. I don't think it's a competition. I don't think there needs to be any back and forth. And I think it says, look, SB2, they've passed a similar bill 6 sessions in a row now. So the Senate has done its job every year, and now we have a speaker that is fully behind school choice and has crafted a bill along with the Chairman Buckley that builds upon what SB2 has done and then adds some new things to it. So your thoughts on
well,
on
absolutely,
HB3?
and the best part about that is you're talking about the difference between HB3 and SB2. So it's like from the policy perspective, it's like, well, yeah, you have to pick one or the other. Do you want the A or the A plus? And I'm not even saying which is which, but you want the A or the A plus? And it's like, well, we might have to split the difference and go with like an A plus minus.
And there's not really anything in conflict, right? I mean, the two bills, like, there's not, it's not like one says, oh, the ESA is going to be 10,000 and the other one says it's going to be 5,000.
Yeah.
It really does, in fact, build upon what the Senate has done.
And if you look at like where they are in conflict, just statutorily, because you can only have one word in a particular place in the code, it tends to be like in the most abstract minutia of how we actually go about implementing these plans. Both, if you put them both on the wall and threw a dart at that general space, you're going to hit a good school choice bill.
Yeah,
right. So regardless, and so we're obviously looking for our policy team, led by Andrew Brown and Mandy and George and Matt and all them. They're working very closely with the authors, and hopefully maybe we'll get an A++ out of everything.
So we have our one pagers out, so you can go to texaspolicy.com and look that up to find out more about the bill, kind of what we think about it. So let's move into the Lieutenant Governor's speech. Came in hot as always. He's tons of energy, but a lot of times, at least the last couple of years, he's come in and he's had to talk about his differences with the House, and that
is the most diplomatic way you could have put that, Brian.
Yeah, the feud that was going on, whether it was property tax or whether it was school choice or really just the sort of frustration. He definitely has been frustrated at the House not taking up conservative priorities the last few years, and he's used this platform in order to talk about that. He didn't do that this year. No. In fact, he talked a lot about the budget, and he talked a lot about keeping Texas because we balance our budget, because we have surpluses every year. We do responsible things with the surplus. We don't overspend. We save money for a rainy day. We have a massive rainy day fund that the statutory limit on rainy day fund has to keep getting extended because we have so much money in the fund. And he just talked about responsible budgeting and responsible spending.
Right. Well, and I think that's kind of a difference in perspective that you see. And we also we'll put a pin in it right now, but we need to delve into what all three of them had said about the local governments and their spending, but we'll come back to that. But yeah, so Lieutenant Governor came in and he said, I can't remember off the top of my head, but at least 3 times spoke about the cooperation. Now, he also said, still early days. There's still a long way to go. And we know
honeymoon phase, as he may have said.
We've never had a time where the Lieutenant Governor has come and, love bomb the Speaker of the House, and which is good because, look, those disagreements are going to come. Yeah. All right, the Speaker has 149 bosses. The Lieutenant Governor, I guess technically he has 31 million bosses, but also in conjunction with his 31 colleagues of the Senate, has to get stuff done to their sensibilities and their preferences. And the fact that there's such an alignment and you don't have these massive fissures even this early in session, I think is something that I've been doing this for almost 12 years now. This is new to me.
Yeah,
this is absolutely new to me, and I really think that it's only going to portend well for when those schisms eventually do form, and they will. and they will. But if you have that trust, you have that working relationship, they're going to be able to get a lot more done, say on property taxes and some of these other flashpoint items than we would if they were throwing tomatoes at each other already.
So just to close out the keynotes, so those are the 3 keynotes that we had. We'll get into the panels here in a little bit. But Chip Roy this morning again,
Yes.
another guy who is so reserved and doesn't really tell you his opinion.
I wish he would. I wish he would speak up more.
Yeah. But he came in hot again this morning. He was talking about national spending. And one of the big points that he made.
He's been remarkably consistent on that. Yes.
Right. about the debt and about our trillions in deficit and debt. And one of the big points he made this morning was at the beginning in 2019 he was saying, look, the government is spending almost $5 trillion. What are we getting for our money? 4 years later, after COVID, now we're spending closer to $8 trillion. Like, where's all the money going?
Right.
And they talked a lot about Doge. They talked a lot. He made a great statement this morning. He said, look, Doge is just simply what the Congress should have been doing the last 2 decades.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, that's their job. Their job is to oversee not just the spending, the purse strings, but also the oversight of how the money is being spent in the executive branch. And he said, look, that's what Congress's job is supposed to be, is to go into these agencies and departments and say, are you spending the taxpayer dollars wisely, yes or no?
Right.
I thought that was a great point. And he brought up Doge, and it's just like, well, if Congress isn't going to do it, then thank goodness we have Trump and Elon and others doing it for us.
Well, I'm at a yes and or yes but, I guess the Congressman. And
comma, however, that's
exactly.
where Representative Roy would say it.
Yeah, I will comma, however that. No, and there's no dispute on his assessment of it is absolutely completely factual, and that fact that you actually have a congressman who is not only aware of their actual Article 1 responsibilities, but actually is making a call to get back to them is great, because nowadays in Congress, absent a couple dozen of them maybe, they're basically celebrities at like that C tier level now. They'd rather see themselves on Fox News or MSNBC, depending on their affiliation, than they would actually getting stuff done. That's what I appreciate about Chip. Now, the thing that Chip tangentially mentioned is that you do have the issue where everything that Doge can do constitutionally can be, because if you said this is flowing from executive authority, that can be undone by executive authority as well.
Right.
And so that's why anything that they do through Doge needs to get baked in via statute, which is going to require Congress to do its job. That's where I get a little more wobbly on it, just because, and it's not because I don't think that there are congressmen who want to do it. I just think there are a lot of folks who would rather have the pie fight as opposed to the pie eating contest.
But that's why I think it's so important that they are transparent with what they're doing, and they're putting out these lists. And of course, they went with the lowest hanging fruit first, right? Like the LGBTQ plays in Ireland and Chile, and studying lesbian.
I've seen the Ireland one, never seen the
bicycling.
Chile one though.
Yeah, the lesbian bicycling in Paraguay or whatever it is. Like go for like the lowest hanging fruit, because look, if they try to if a Democrat administration, God forbid, gets in the next 4 years, if they try to reestablish some of that stuff, there will be, the American public won't accept a lot of that.
Well, not only that, but let me say about specifically with what they were doing over at just kind of the general check register of the federal government. There was what I think he said $4.7 trillion of activity over the last several years that's not even ascribed to a particular law or program. It's just spent.
Yeah.
Now, granted, that's the memo field on a check. You can talk, but like this attitude where it's
Who
like,
writes checks anymore though? Because does anybody even understand that analogy?
The people that listen to our podcast probably do. But I'll have to check see if my mom's still
still listening.
Yeah, because she's listening to the podcast. But anywho, the issue is not so much that those are blank or that that money disappeared. I bet it found its way somewhere. The issue is more that the ramshackle accounting, and this would be the attitude of, I don't need to fill that in. We don't need to ascribe this to a particular item or program. And it's like that's our money.
Yeah.
Or even worse, with the way things have been going, that's money that's taken out with an IOU with our name on the bottom
It's
of
dead.
it.
So it's actually our kids' money.
Yeah, exactly. And so that part has been incredibly refreshing. Not it coming to light. That's actually harrowing. But the fact that it's like those days are done. at least in the federal system, those days are done. And in state and Texas, we're doing pretty well ourselves. Yeah, we can get back to the locals, talk about all that stuff, but we say that for the panels.
One other thing that's done that that Congressman Roy talked about is the border. What's done is the open border is done.
Yes.
We've gone from 5,000 to 6,000 per day coming across to now 500 a day, or there was even a day when it was down to single digits when certain areas.
But the single
of
digits
Texas,
is still too many coming over illegally.
Right, but we're down. Look, I mean, it just proves that Biden saying that well he needed Congress to act or that he couldn't do anything on his own. All of that was false.
Well, he found something to do on his own in the last couple of days right before the election.
Right, yeah, exactly. But now that you have somebody who's actually committed to border security and enforcing the law, and you have this amazing dream team of Trump and Homan and the DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, that are actually becoming partners with the state of Texas.
Right.
And much to our surprise, not the right word, but thankfully Texas has not taken a step back. Texas, Governor Abbott mentioned, in addition to talking about school choice, talked about the border and said, look, we are now getting back to doing what the state's role should be in securing border security, and hopefully they'll go a little bit further in creating a new department here, a new border force in Texas that will be committed to that, because now we have a partner in the federal government who's actually doing its job and not trying to kneecap the states.
I do enjoy reading online the coverage of President Trump's border actions, and they're it's shock and awe from some folks, and it's just or at least at the very least the shock, and it's like he literally promised exactly this. Yeah, he literally ran on this specifically.
Yeah. I mean, keeping his promises. I mean, we talked about that, wrote an article about that, in the first 10 days. This is what keeping your promises looks like with Trump. And, of course, he's ruffling a lot of feathers, particularly on the left. But this is it. He ran on this day. He's doing the things that he ran on. He's actually doing it, and this is what it looks like. So, anyway. All right, let's get into the panels. We got about a few minutes left. One of the ones that was a big one is taxpayer-funded lobbying. I mean, Senator Mays Middleton just announced that he filed his bill, HB 19, to get rid of taxpayer-funded lobbying. They had a really good discussion, I thought, at the panel. It bled over into some other panels with Representative Troxclair. She's going to have the House, I think, bill on that. Talk a little bit about that issue in this session, because it's one of those ones that people look at it and they say, that's going to be a tough one to get across the finish line, and yet there feels like there's a lot of momentum and there's a lot of really good representatives who are going to help make that push.
Yeah, well, I mean, as we've said before, specifically with school choice, the Senate's not the problem on taxpayer-funded lobbying. And taxpayer-funded lobbying, I think is another one where there's as much misinformation about it as there is good information about it. Because simply put, I don't know a single representative, I don't know a single senator who, if their phone rings and they look down and it says, mayor of such and such city, will excuse themselves from talking with me and go and take that call.
Right.
Right? Because
as important as you are. So that's saying a lot.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But yeah, so that's not only a constituent, that is a constituent who has a subordinate level of power.
Right.
So at the even if it's let's say that it's somebody with a liberal city in a, overall conservative district, or it's or vice versa, a tiny conservative town in a liberal district. I know for a fact that those are some of the first calls that get answered, because that represents, just again, not to go into the political science of this, that represents a coherent power base that exists within the people that they need to convince to elect them.
Yeah.
And so what you see is that they are incredibly responsive to that. What doesn't make sense is why we need some sort of intercessor between that consolidates that power and takes it to the legislature. When I say consolidates, I really mean consolidates in the hands of only a handful of organs. So, for example, if you're in TML, and you're the
municipal league,
you represents the cities, and you're a member of Gun Barrel City or some, one of these smaller towns, what you want from the legislature is not going to be what's being advocated by them. What Austin wants, what Houston wants, what Dallas, Fort Worth, and just El Paso, all the big ones want. That's going to get its hearing in front of the legislature. But what you might have a special niche water issue. You might have something that has to do with transportation or infrastructure of some sorts. that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to percolate to the top. And because you are such a small part of that organization, the big boys tend to crowd you out, whether it's counties, whether it's school boards is a whole other thing. Whether it's any of those, the big players set the agenda, and then the small people just have to go along with it, and then they are basically conscripted in whatever cause these leftist big cities or counties tend to be pursuing.
Well, and that's one of the ironic things about it is that the locals who are spending the most on taxpayer-funded lobbyists are the Houstons and the Austins and the Dallas. And the idea that like the Houston mayor is going to call Briscoe Cain or Paul Betancourt and not get his call answered is absurd.
Well, it's absurd specifically because with Paul Betancourt, they've worked together for a decade.
Right, exactly. And of course they work. And then in these more rural districts, like with Senator Kevin Sparks or like out there in the Panhandle, these communities are the lifeblood of those districts.
Right.
And of course he's going to take. If you've got a concern, of course they're going to address that. We heard not to mention Ellen Troxclair again. She was on her panel. She was fighting for the rules. She said she's tired of the rules getting taken advantage of. So I just don't understand the logic behind
Austin City Councilwoman Ellen Troxclair fighting for the rules
for the rural districts or the rural parts of her district.
Yeah.
And so I just don't understand the logic. I mean, I would love to have somebody who can defend this come up here and say, this is the reason why we need to spend what is upwards of $70 million a year of your tax dollars going to pay for high-priced Austin lobbyists to go have conversations that these mayors and city councilmen and whatever's could easily have themselves and save us all the money.
Get a less, I would say, get a more authentic reception than some of these lobbyists that darken the doorway, and some officers like, oh boy, here we go again. And but again, party hat notwithstanding, if somebody that represents a power base from your district calls you, that call is getting answered usually at the expense of anything else that's going on at the moment.
Another huge issue, property tax is still an issue that is on the front burner, despite the state giving historic tax relief, $18 billion, or some would say $14 to $18 billion last year in historic tax relief. The panel this week with Troxclair and with Senator Betancourt, you were on that panel as well.
My friend Jeremy was, yes.
Our friend James Quintero was hosting that panel. The name of the panel was Stop the Steal.
Yes, sir.
Right. So it wasn't just about how do we get property tax done, because what Governor Patrick said yesterday is over the last 3 sessions, I think 3 or 4 sessions, the state has $51 billion in property tax relief, and yet we just ran a poll. We just were in the field asking people, are property taxes a burden? 83% of people say that property taxes are still a burden. I think it's something like 60% said that their property taxes went up. How can it be, Derek, that the state has handed out $51 billion in property tax relief, and yet 83% of the people say that they don't feel it?
Well, you first have to understand how much the state collects in property taxes. It's a massive number. Yeah, zero, exactly.
Zero, yeah, to Ellen's point.
But Representative Troxclair's, but it highlights one simple truth. And this is one of the issues where even when we deal with compression, obviously, we talk about here how the TPPF plan is like, do you want compression, you want valuation caps, you want exemption increases. Yeah, I was about to say, if you ask us which of those do you want, we just say yes.
Yes, all of the above.
The thing is, or specifically with the compression side, is it does puts a hand in front of the fist coming at the heads of the local tax assessor. They're the ones that should be taking the political hit for property taxes. There is no state property tax, and so it does take some of the sting off that. But they don't even treat it like the charity that it is, because as we've discussed on this show, as we've discussed on the panel, they being the locals, they will go ahead and in lockstep levy additional taxes, so that they don't actually feel, now they, in this case, being the taxpayer, don't actually feel the reduction of their taxes.
Right.
What they do feel, and what they're going to feel if, let's say, Texas got itself into some dire straits, heaven forbid, and not able to make that relief expenditure from the government, those taxes are going to skyrocket because these people are spending like drunken sailors.
And they're just totally brazen about it. I mean, there was an article. I mean, I live in Kyle, which is just south of Austin here, and at the city council meeting, at the Kyle City Council meeting, they said in open council, whatever, they said, thankfully, because of the tax cut that we all got in 21, the homestead tax cut, when it went from 40,000 to 100,000, they said at the time of the meeting that, well, if we raise taxes, that will, quote, that the tax cut will essentially balance out their tax increase. And so that, basically they won't, those of us taxpayers won't see a tax increase because thankfully the state has given us a tax cut, and they will essentially take up the tax cut, right? So we won't actually feel it. We won't actually get a tax cut as a result. And they're brazen and they're completely open about it.
It reminds me of there was a little-known cartoon that was on in the early 2000s called Clone High. Do you remember this?
I do not remember that.
I believe it was on MTV, which not exactly known for its entertainment. But there was a quote that has always stuck with me, specifically in the realm of public finance, in which the guy who ran the school, was spending quite opulently, and he said, "Look, I watched the first 2/3 of the MC Hammer documentary, and if it taught me one thing, it's the money never runs out." And that, I think, is one of the issues that some of these locals are going to have to contend with if they're not made to contend with it more statutorily, which I hope is what's coming this session.
So how does the state get its hands around this? Because, you would hope that at the local level that, constituents would be voting these people out who are doing this kind of thing and saying, look, we're tired. We actually get a tax cut from the state. Why are you then stealing that tax cut from us? But unfortunately, people don't show up to those elections, and only a handful of people determine it. So what can the state do to get its hands around this to prevent the locals from stealing our tax?
Well, just look at what Governor Abbott's called for already. He wants all tax rates to be subject to a 2/3 vote before they're increased. He wants uniform election dates. He wants I don't want to put policy in his head. That wasn't part of his speech. But there's other things on the table. We can get like a Swedish debt break system, which is a whole other thing that we can all hear Vance McGinn talking over there. He could come tell us about. But all that to say is that there are many things that we can do to bring the I don't want to say to bring the locals to heel, but I don't know when do you change your rhetoric on this, because they are so brazenly spent, and I shouldn't say not all. It's the 85% of them that give the other 15 a bad name,
right?
They are all just spending wantonly, and in part getting subsidized by the state, and those days need to end.
Yeah. So property tax, energy, another big issue. There was a couple panels, one on just the grid in itself and making sure that the lights come on. There was another panel on nuclear energy and support for that. We see in the public, again, we did some polling. The public is generally supportive of nuclear, but when you ask them, do you want a nuclear reactor in your county or in your backyard? There's generally some reticence there, and it kind of is about a split. Where do you see the energy debate going? It was not one of Abbott's emergency items, so not a whole lot's been done on that yet, but it is still a top 5 issue. Yeah.
So specifically on nuclear, even if that attitude shifted tomorrow, and 100% of people were fine with it, it would still be a long, arduous task. Because even just building even if we go with the small modular reactors, the actual base, underlying infrastructure for that takes a while to build up. And so we're still gonna be here in Texas, a natural gas state for quite a while longer. But that being said, I do think that attitudes are starting to shift, right? And so you mentioned a lot of people don't want a 3 Mile Island in their own backyard. Thing is, and I always say this when we talk about nuclears, 3 Mile Island was what was supposed to happen. They say Chernobyl happened and 3 Mile Island happened. They talk about them in the same breath. One of them
not remotely the same.
Yeah, one of them rendered an entire portion of what is now Ukraine completely uninhabitable for decades.
Yeah.
The other one flipped off. That was it.
Turned off.
Yeah. The other one, the safety protocol. Yeah, there was an event, but the protocols worked. and it stopped.
They had a funny statistic at that panel because 0 people have ever died in America from some kind of nuclear fallout, or even when we've had issues like 3 Mile Island, 0 people died. They said they framed it by saying more people have died installing solar panels on roofs than have died from radiation as from a nuclear fallout.
And you're getting a lot of radiation on that roof though, but it's coming from the sun. But that being, you're absolutely right. And even we had our friends from the Japanese consulate that came by about a week or 2 ago, visit us at the office, and even then we were talking about how even then there was not even a death from.
We're getting booed by our bosses. Yeah, they're walking by and just heckling us.
I think we're getting. Oh, did you not mention school choice? We're contractually obligated.
Every 10 minutes we got to talk about school choice. There, school choice.
Yeah,
Greg,
you had
Davey.
one job, Brian. You had one job. But all that to say is, even at Fukushima, nobody was irradiated to death.
Right. Then they mentioned that too. The people who died from Fukushima died from the tsunami.
Yeah.
Like not the now
tsunamis. We probably need some tsunami management. They are or smart tsunami control. There's
right on tsunamis is our new campaign.
Yeah, we'll just put it underwater. So it's Aaliyah's problem. It's Aaliyah and Larry's problem now.
Underwater. I see what you did there.
Yeah. There you go.
But the energy, I mean, we're still going to do grid reform.
Yeah.
Likely, we still need to make sure that, we have enough power that the lights come on. And we have made some reforms in the last couple of years, and so far, everything seems to be working. But obviously, again, back to the polling, about 60% of people feel like we haven't done enough to make sure that the lights come on every year. So there still needs to be something that we need to address there.
Absolutely. And I think that people, what you see, I got to quote a friend of the pod, Brad Johnson, on this thing he refers to online as ERCOT panic Twitter.
Yeah.
That is largely gone. I mean, now obviously, with what happened in 2021, a lot of people were very concerned about that. But that is largely gone. We are seeing, I wouldn't say great, but, robust operating margins between consumption and production, or expected consumption and production. And in the cases where there is going to be that pinch point, we have mechanisms in place by which we can avoid that.
Yeah.
And so I think that the bad part about that is I don't want that to fall out of the public consciousness, because it is a very important, people want the lights to turn on when they flip the switch. They want the water to come out when they turn the spigot. They want that to happen. The thing is, it's going to take concerted policy effort to get there. The Lieutenant Governor spoke a lot about it on our stage yesterday. So I do think that there's still a motivation in the legislature to get that stuff done.
So now, while we have a few minutes left, I know you're getting prepped for your panel. You have one here in a couple minutes. Very interesting panel that you're going to be on called The Next 100 Years for Texas. So what's going to happen in the next 100 years, Derek?
It's going to be the same as before, but with flying cars. That's basically it. No.
Can we get the hoverboard? I've always wanted the hoverboard from Back to the Future 2.
But I don't understand how it works. If it still hovers, but it doesn't work on water. You ever notice that?
No, it's been a while since I've seen that movie.
That was the whole conceit of the hoverboard. That's how they caught him, because he started to go across water. Like, you idiot, hoverboards don't work on water.
I didn't know.
But it still hovered. So, you know what?
Genius.
Well, that's, I don't know. Anyway, no, the next 100 years.
What's next for Texas?
So what we're going to consider in that panel, and obviously going to be moderated by Josh Trevino, who is intellectually no slouch when it comes to these sort of matters.
He's a good predictor of what's going to happen in the next 100 years.
Exactly. So I mean, 100 might be beyond his time horizon, but we're really kind of looking at some of the emerging trends, and I wouldn't say trends that are like faddish trends, but trends that have been emerging in some time. Like, one of the things that we are going to discuss that currently informs a lot of our work on the border, currently informs a lot of our work in our SST campaign, is how is Texas, or what is Texas's role in foreign policy?
Right.
If the Biden administration and the Obama administration before it had taught us anything, it's that you cannot always credibly expect the federal government to abide, to engage in the best practices or even in good faith with what the state needs with external parties.
Yeah.
Mexico being first and foremost. But what are we doing with? Again, we have folks. There's 1 million consulates in Houston. Whenever they come to Austin, they always come by. They all have interest in Texas succeeding. Whether it's they want to bring their businesses to Texas, which we have a lot. We got the British consulate coming next week, in which we are going to discuss criminal justice issues. They all want to see Texas succeed for that relationship.
Right.
These are not relationships that are being brought in by Marco Rubio at state saying, oh, hey, when you're in Texas, make sure you go down to TPPF. No, they're coming here and wanting to talk to TPPF.
That's interesting. I mean, they really are like looking at Texas as like its own, its own model. It's not like what America is doing the way that we would look at like Spain or France or the Netherlands or Greenland or whatever. But they're actually looking at Texas and saying Texas
we're talking about foreign nations. So Greenland,
pretty soon the 51st state. I just threw that in there because it's been in the news. But they're looking at Texas as like a model, not what America is doing, but like looking at specifically Texas.
Well, even if they don't necessarily jive with any of the particular policy suggestions, Glenn Hager was on our, Comptroller Glenn Hager was on our stage. What was it? That was Wednesday afternoon.
2 days ago, yeah.
And he mentions, and pretty soon he's going to have to revise it again. But right now, in terms of world economies, Texas is number 8. Obviously, being an aggregate part of the United States is number 1. We'll never pass them because we're part of it.
Yeah, I thought that was funny. Somebody came up on stage and says, someday we'll get to number 1. I'm like, well, how does that work if we're still part of the United States?
I would say some people have solutions for that. That's a whole different podcast.
Exit.
But anyway, yes. But like these, so I think I don't know if it's the UK or France, but one of them is the next one up that we're about to overtake. And so even if they don't think that the Texas model is right for them. And, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the death of Europe, I'm sure, on that panel. Yeah. But even if they don't feel the Texas model is right for them, you cannot deny that as an independent, when I say independent, I don't mean of the United States, but as an independent, discrete entity, Texas sets the standard on so much in the world. Mm-hmm. Whether it's the process of, Western higher education, whether it's just our manufacturing base we have here, something as simple and rote as that. We're the ones who are setting the standard, and these countries want to have basically bilateral relations with Texas as an administrative subdivision of the United States. Yeah. Whereas the kind of stodgy normal statecraft can go on up above.
Now, I'm not on the panel, but if I was, I would talk about the media landscape over the next 100 years. And I mean, honestly,
really, something you don't usually mention that.
Or over the next 4 to 5 years. I mean, just what we've seen with this last election is, a lot of people calling it the podcast election with, Trump going on, essentially circumventing traditional media outlets and going to a place where millions of people are consuming, a 3-hour podcast on Joe Rogan or Theo Vaughn or what have you. I'm very interested to see how that grows over the next 4 or 5 years, to see if the J.D. Vances of the world who will take up the Trump legacy and push it forward, start to just essentially ignore or just ability altogether traditional media outlets because they don't feel like whether or not they get short shrift or whether or not they get the ability or feel like they're being ganged up against. It's just these other outlets are allowing people to sit down and have a conversation about the future of the country, whereas a 30-minute or 22-minute news segment doesn't let them do that.
Well, and let me on that. And unfortunately, we gotta wrap. But one thing I would say about that is, a lot of people especially people on the right, like to say, "Oh, legacy media is dead." It will never be dead. The percentage that it represents as part of the brain space of the average consumer is plummeting. Mm-hmm. It will never die because there's some people where that model works just fine for. But with all these new models, with other and what that is that's a decentralization of narrative, and that's what I think is the best part about it.
I'm actually really interested to see what happens with news, and because Viacom owns CBS, but the vast majority of what Viacom makes their money off of is movies and television shows and things like that. I'm curious to see if they just figure at some point the news part of their business is just not worth it, and what happens with that if that gets it gets that there's essentially, like, I'm trying to look for the right word, just all collaborating.
The right idea?
Yeah, looking for the right idea. But it just all gets condensed essentially into 1 or 2 different or 3 different outlets. So I'm interested to see if those organizations then start to say the news side of things just is not worth our time and our effort anymore. more, especially when everybody's turning to podcasts and things like that to get their news. So anyway, if y'all talk about that, let me know. I would be happy to raise my hand and ask a question. So
Absolutely.
all right, so we got a hard stop. Derek's got to go do a video, or got to do a panel with us. So we appreciate y'all being here. If you weren't able to be here at the conference and see all these excellent guests and all of our panels, all of our things that we did, all the panels, all the keynotes, all the speeches, will be online. It should be online probably by the time that we publish this this podcast. So you can find all the great speeches and all the panels on our YouTube page. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And as we always like to say at the end of the show, in the immortal words of Sam Houston, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.